without any further ado, I'd like to welcome to the floor Mr. Ian R. Crane.
Everything being equal? Wow. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for turning out tonight. Thanks, Therese, for your insights there. I'm going to, I think, build on some of what you've said there, and also try to put it into the bigger picture as well. So, can I ask, how many here have actually seen my financial meltdown talk? Okay, just a few. All right. Well, Jim Core and I started that tour in November of last year, and since November we've given, I think, about 23 presentations around Ireland on the manipulated global financial meltdown. And what I'm going to share with you, when I get my breath back, what I'm going to share with you is my observation that what's occurred in Ireland, and indeed is in the process of occurring in the rest of Europe, is no accident. Everybody who follows this agenda knew it was going to happen. It's not rocket science, we simply knew the script. And one of the reasons that Ireland was targeted was to ensure that the Irish people did not gain ownership of what is potentially the largest hydrocarbon reserves in Western Europe. What is off the coast of Ireland is potentially far greater than as in the North Sea, and that's Norway and the UK combined. That information is not in the public domain for a number of reasons. And as you guys are very well aware, right now, Ireland is on an absolute cusp. Because, and I'm not gloating, because let me tell you, one of the reasons that I focus my attention on Ireland is because I know that Ireland is the experiment. Iceland was supposed to be the experiment, but it didn't work. And what is absolutely staggering, and the question that everybody in Ireland should be asking, is why do the Irish politicians not take the Icelandic template? Because the Icelandic template is the one that should have been used, which is basically telling the World Bank and the IMF to go take a hike. And that the people of Iceland do not, in any way, shape or form, accept or bear any responsibility for their financial meltdown, which was deliberately manipulated and created by their bankers, under instruction from a higher power. The visible part of that power is known as the Bilderberger Group in Europe. But you have the opportunity right now. The people have given Enda Kenny a mandate. Tragically, I have absolutely no confidence whatsoever that he's going to do anything with that mandate, because he will have received his marching orders probably before he came into office. You know, Bill Hicks, the American comedian, and a wonderful social commentator, used to tell a story, and he said, he had this vision that every time a new president was sworn in on the White House lawn, he was immediately taken down into the basement cinema of the White House. And then he was shown the real film of what occurred at Dealey Plaza in 1963 when Kennedy was assassinated. And they let it sink in, and then they say, now, Mr. President, any questions? Well, I don't know what film they're going to show Enda Kenny, or what film they showed Charles Hockey in 1986. Because I will give you a classic example of how once a leader, or once a leader of the opposition, gets into the office of Taoiseach, or Prime Minister, or President, of any country around the world in a democracy, they immediately change their tune. So the mandate, of course, is incredible. I mean, it's the most incredible mandate probably in Irish history. And here's an opportunity for Enda Kenny to say, I and the Irish people and my party do not take any responsibility for the malfeasance of my predecessor. Which is exactly what occurred in Iceland. Which is why the former Prime Minister of Iceland is under arrest and facing criminal charges, along with a number of senior bankers. In fact, I think I will show you as well, that just 1 month ago, 4 senior bankers in Iceland were arrested and charged. The Icelandic government, the new Icelandic government, have drawn their line in the sand. The New Deal. The New Deal. I mean, what we're going to see over the next few days and weeks is a lot of political rhetoric in the media, which is going to keep attention away from the real problem, which is, of course, the fact that basically the reality is the country doesn't exist. You've been told the country doesn't exist, and I will show you that to you, because the guys who rule, who really rule from behind the scenes, take great delight in rubbing the people's noses in what's going on. And when there's no reaction, they just take it as a mandate to pursue their agenda. And I have some correspondence with some people in Brussels, and I'm going to show you later in this presentation 2 front pages from the Irish press last autumn, which had the people, the bureaucrats in Brussels, the psycho-sociopathic bureaucrats, high-fiving in the corridors of Brussels because they believed they had reached the point beyond which there was no return for the Irish people, and that Ireland was ostensibly an EU colony. Which in reality, right now, it is. It absolutely is, as I shall explain. But these guys have an opportunity. They absolutely have an opportunity. I mean, they've replaced the main man. And, over the last 6 months, anybody who has been sort of living around the Tullamore area will have heard the stories of Mr. Cowan turning up late in the evening at a pub with his supporters, taking over the pub, and basically drinking himself into a stupor. And in the course of my research, I try and get my head into why these guys behave the way they do. And I think if I'd have been in Brian Cowan's shoes in the last couple of years, I'd have wanted to go into a pub and drink myself into a stupor. He knows he has not only sold his own soul, he has sold the soul of the Irish nation. The script had been written for him, the real script had been written for him, and he didn't have the courage to challenge that script and say, you know what, I actually prefer the Icelandic script. And that's why you haven't read anything about what's been going on in Iceland, because these guys, the powers behind the scene, do not want people to know that there is an option not to just take the burden of the bondholders' debt into public ownership and effectively burden many generations of future taxpayers with lives of abject economic slavery. Well, that's what's left. Because my prediction, my prognosis, if this paradigm continues, and if there isn't any change, and we're at that cusp, then within probably less than 100 years, Ireland will be an economic wasteland. Which is what these guys want, because Ireland is so rich in resources, they want total ownership of it. And here's a short article from the Irish Independent last year, which once again is spelling... Oh, sorry, that's the wrong article. It's an article that says that nobody in Irish government could have any excuse for saying they didn't know what was coming. They were all warned. And we know that Lenihan was speaking to the IMF a long time before he finally admitted that he was speaking to the IMF. So we have, Fianna Fáil in total meltdown. I mean, they're out of power. That's it. They're history. They're not coming back anytime soon. It is a tremendous opportunity. And if Enda Kenny doesn't take that opportunity, then he's probably got about 100 days maximum to take that opportunity. After that, I'm sorry, but it doesn't matter what name you call the party, it's the same shit, different leader. He's got 100 days to make a difference. I'm going to show you now exactly how Ireland and every other country in Western Europe was manipulated into this situation. And it's a brilliant tool, dreamed up by the globalists and the international bankers. And it's called fractional reserve banking. Fractional reserve banking. Now, fractional reserve banking is actually mystical. Let's see if we can get a bit more focus there. It's actually even more mystical than alchemy, apparently. Because with alchemy, at least you need a base metal, you need lead, to be able to turn it into gold. With fractional reserve banking, you don't even need that. It is literally money from nothing. Money from nothing. And they use this tool to get countries, businesses, individuals into debt. As much debt as they possibly can. How many people here have a mortgage? Okay, how many people here are going to admit having a mortgage? You know what mortgage means? Mortgage. Death grip. The death grip. It's in your face. So I'm going to give you very quickly the sort of 101, the introduction to fractional reserve banking, so that you can see how mystical it is and how perfectly it works for those who are working to a long-term agenda to take total control. I mean, this is a game of Monopoly. I'm sure everybody here has played some version of Monopoly at some point. And the objective of Monopoly is to win the game by owning everything on the board, by bankrupting your opponents. And if you're the banker, you have a bit of an advantage. Because, every now and again, if you actually run a bit short of cash, then, you can slip yourself the odd couple of hundred or whatever you need. Well, these guys don't even need to do that. They just add a couple of noughts on the computer screen. And it's called fractional reserve banking. So, to give you the quick overview, fractional reserve banking, all you need is a central bank. And the central bank comes into being by effectively an act of Parliament, act of Congress, whatever. And it normally comes into being because of pressure being brought to bear by the globalists, bankers, on the President, or on the Prime Minister, or on the Taoiseach, whatever, to establish a central bank and give the central bankers control of the economy, control of the money supply. It's in private ownership. To get the ball rolling, all they need is some pretend assets. So in this example, we'll give them $1 million, and they achieve that simply by typing it into a computer screen. And then using the fractional reserve basis, they multiply that by, and we'll be conservative, 5 in this case. So they have turned that 1 million, which didn't exist in the first place, to 5 million that doesn't exist. But now they've got to get it into the economy. So for that, they use regional banks and high street banks. So in this example, what we have is we'll have a couple of regional banks, Bank A and Bank B, and then some high street banks, Bank C, Bank D, and Bank E. Now what it's got to do is it's got to get this 5 million into the markets via these banks. So it's going to use that 5 million to give each of these banks $1 million. And these banks are going to use a fractional reserve rate of 10 to 1. So they've converted their 1 million, which came from this 5 million that doesn't exist, and they've converted it into 10 million. And the same down here. And these banks are going to lend these banks money. So what we've got, basically, from 1 million, which didn't exist in the first place, we've now created 70 million to pump into the market. And actually, when it gets really clever, is when these banks, the high street banks, lend money back to these banks, and then they use the fractional reserve rate again to multiply it by 10 to 1. So they lend these banks 1 million of that 10 million, and then they multiply it by 10 million, and so on and so forth. So you see how money is literally created from nothing. And then it's put into the marketplace via the mortgage, via the business loan, or the government needing to borrow money for infrastructure projects like building a new tramway in a capital city.